The Michigan Wolverines hit the trifecta last season. They beat Ohio State. They won the division. They won the Big Ten. That, of course, got Jim Harbaugh and the Wolverines into the college football playoffs for the first time, where they did lose in round one to eventual champion Georgia Bulldogs, but nevertheless, a successful season for Michigan, Jim Harbaugh, and the Wolverines, no matter how you look at it. Now, when I look ahead to 2022 for Michigan, kind of a mixed bag, in my opinion, right, in terms of what you lost and what you have coming back. A lot coming back offensively, reason to be excited on that side of the ball. Losing a lot defensively, particularly 2 all-world edge rushers and 3 starters in the secondary. And my concern, if I'm a Michigan fan, if you lack in the secondary, a lot of times you can make that up by having an elite pass rush. If you lack elite pass rush, a lot of time you can make some of that up by having elite secondary play. The combination of having to replace 3 starters in that secondary plus 2 all-world edge rushers could potentially be a big problem for Michigan were they to play a team with an elite passing game like, Ohio State. Anyway, in today's video, we're going to take a look at Michigan. I'll give you a little bit of a rundown offensively and defensively, and then we're going to put Michigan's schedule up on the screen. I'm going to go through it game by game and give you a winner and a loser for Michigan every single week. Let's go. Oh, yeah, good morning, Nat. It's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, and guess what? I'm live for you on YouTube today. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it also, and in addition to that as well, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. Some of them are even watchable. Some of them aren't. That determination is left up to you, the viewer. At the end of the video, make sure you let me know what you think I got right, what you think I got wrong, and what you think Michigan's overall record might be in 2022. Do me a favor, hit the thumbs up on this video. It's a huge help. And hey, share these videos somewhere. Hit up your Facebook, your Instagram, your Twitter, your TikTok, or whatever you have, your social media platforms. Help Uncle Lou grow the channel heading into the start of the 2022 college football season, which is only 11 days away. That's right, week 0 coming up 11 days from today. Let's get to the Michigan video. All right, let's start off by taking a look at Michigan offensively for 2022. Now, they lose their offensive coordinator, Josh Gattis. He's gone to South Beach to take the offensive coordinator job at Miami underneath Mario Cristobal. So Harbaugh's chosen to go with the 2-coordinator approach. Sharon Moore, is that the Sharon Moore, and what's the other guy's name? Of course, I didn't write it down. Sharon Moore and Matt Weiss. There it is, Matt Weiss. Sorry about that. So the dual coordinator approach. So we'll see how that works. That's really the biggest change for Michigan offensively, in my opinion, is just a coordinator situation. You bring back a lot of your key pieces, starters, things like that. You look at your quarterback position. Of course, you got the McNamara versus McCarthy argument, which was a point of contention for some Michigan fans last year, at least from what I read in my comment section over the course of the year. McNamara got the start. McCarthy would play in almost every single game. With McNamara, you know what you're going to get, right? He's a proven leader, led you to the playoffs. You beat Ohio State with him. You won the Big Ten with him. I do think McCarthy gives you potentially a higher ceiling and upside. I definitely like his big playmaking ability better than McNamara. But I have a feeling we're going to see a similar situation at quarterback with Michigan that we saw last year. I think both guys will play. I think McNamara probably starts. I think you probably see a lot of McCarthy. The good news, if you're a Michigan fan and you're sort of trying to figure out which camp you want to be in, Michigan's first 3 games of the season, which we'll put the schedule up in a second, are complete garbage. I mean, it's just absolutely horrible games. Michigan, Jim Harbaugh, those 2 new offensive coordinators, they're going to have the first 3 weeks of the season to pretty much have a live, open quarterback competition if that's what they choose to do. Michigan's going to win those first 3 games no matter which of those 2 guys plays QB. So we'll see what Michigan does the first 3 weeks of the season in terms of the quarterback situation. Now, with the offensive line, you only lose 2 starters off the offensive line, so that's good. You get 3 back. And you've got plenty of talent there on that roster to supplement those 2 guys that you lost. I think Michigan going to have one of the best offensive lines in all of college football again this coming season. They won the award. I forget the name of it. There's an award for the best offensive line as a whole. Michigan won that last year. They'll have a top 5, top 10 offensive line again in 2022, which is great news for running back Blake Corum. He was kind of the number 2 last year. He's going to be the number 1 last year. And even as the quote-unquote backup, and let's be real, when you're the number 2 running back on a team these days, you're not really a backup. Most teams have 2 starting running backs. The running back that gets the first carry, okay, maybe he's the starter, but most legitimate big-time college football programs have like a 1A, 1B situation, and that's what Blake Corum was last year. I mean, he almost had 1,000 yards, probably would have had 1,000 yards. He had it was an ankle injury. Something slowed him down a little bit towards the end of the season, but he had a great year last year. he'll be the main guy this year. You also have Donovan Edwards, who will sort of back him up. Donovan Edwards will sort of be the Blake Corum of last year, right? I watched the Michigan spring game. I know it's a spring game, but look, I don't get to go to the practices. I'm not in on the team meetings. All I can do with these teams is watch what's available for me to watch. And Blake Corum looked unbelievable in the Michigan spring game. I don't think Michigan offensively is going to have very many, if any, issues at all this season. I think they're going to be better offensively. Last year, they were sort of led by their defense, right, which we're going to talk about in a second. I think this year it might be the other way around. Georgia's in a similar boat, and I'm not trying to compare Georgia and Michigan necessarily in terms of overall talent or anything like that. But, of course, Georgia lost a ton off of its defense. They're going to have to rely more on their offense this year. I see a similar sort of path for Michigan in 2022. I think Michigan's going to win more of its games offensively as opposed to defensively, which is what happened a lot of times last year. When you look at the wide receiver situation, of course, you get your top wide receiver back, Ronnie Bell. That's great news. He was sidelined last year with an ACL. This is a quarterback's best friend here. Well, again, whether it's McNamara or McCarthy, having Ronnie Bell back is going to be a huge deal because the rest of the wide receivers, although talented, are a little bit young and inexperienced. And I like the tight end situation at Michigan as well. So offensively, whatever you thought about Michigan's offense last year, I think it's going to be better, some amount better than that this year. So I don't know what you graded Michigan's offense, 0 to 100 type of thing. If you gave Michigan an 80 or an 85 offensively last year, I think you're going to see an 85 or a 90 this year for Michigan on offense. Again, my only real concern is the two new coordinators. You never really know, particularly at the quarterback position, how the players are going to respond, adapt, or react to new offensive coordinators that sometimes bring in new terminology, new plays, new formations, things like that. But as far as the personnel that Michigan has offensively, I think fans have every reason to be excited. All right, now on to the defense. And unfortunately for Michigan, it's kind of the opposite of what we talked about offensively. Michigan loses a ton off of that defense, most notably Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo, or whatever his name is. Those two elite all-world edge rushers are both gone off to the NFL. And I also mentioned previously you lose 3 starters off the back end. Now, what I think is going to happen with Michigan along the defensive front as it relates to those two edge rushers and even the guys on the inside, Michigan's got, I think, 6 or 7 guys that they think can fill those roles, right? I mentioned Michigan's schedule a little bit earlier, and again, we're going to put that up in just a second, but their first 3 games are walks in the park. I think you're going to see a lot of players play along Michigan's front in those first 3 games as the coaching staff tries to figure out what is the best combination of 3 or 4 players to put along this defensive line that gives us the best results, right? New defensive coordinator there. The third defensive coordinator in 3 years. So these juniors and seniors at Michigan are now on their 3rd defensive coordinator in as many years. Not the best case scenario, but we'll see how that sort of all plays out along the defensive front. Now, inside linebacker position, I think they're going to be fine. Now, they lost a couple of players from there, but again, this was a position where Michigan rotated a lot of players in and out last year. So these 2 linebackers that are going to be starting this year, which is probably going to be Junior Colson and Nakai, is that his name? Nakai Hill-Green. They should be fine at the inside linebacker position. In fact, I think Colson may end up being the best player on Michigan's defense in 2022. Now, the secondary. We got to talk about the secondary. You got to replace 3 starters back there. Never easy to do. You're playing typically 4, sometimes 5 DBs, 6 in extreme circumstances with some weird type dime scenarios or third and really, really longs. But generally speaking, you're replacing on a base defense 75% of your secondary. And even on a dime, you're having to replace 50% of that dime secondary, losing 3 starters, including, one of the best safeties in America last year, Dax Hill. I think he was the first safety taken, in fact, in the NFL draft. Now, you got some players again, young but talented and inexperienced players that are ready to step up. Rod Moore, R.J. Moten. Michigan fans will know these names. I have confidence in Michigan's defense over the long run. I do think it's going to take some time this season for Michigan's defense to kind of find its way, particularly along that defensive front. Like I said, this is where Michigan's schedule is going to benefit them early in the season. I do not think Michigan will have as good of a defense as they had in 2021, but I think the potential is there for the offense to make up that difference. Let's put Michigan's schedule up on the screen and see what they can do in 2022. All right, there you go. And like I mentioned, I don't know if you could ask for an easier start to the season if you're a Michigan fan, right? But we got to do better here. You have to, no Power 5 non-con opponents. I mean, this is pitiful. I know the Big Ten plays 9 conference games, and they like to rub that in the face of the SEC, man. And look, great. You play 9 conference games. I'm all in favor of that across the board for every conference. You got to be scheduling at least one Power 5 non-con game a year, though, don't you? As a Michigan fan, I want Michigan fans to tell me how excited they are to watch these games the first 3 weeks of the season. Wouldn't you rather be playing even a mid-level SEC team or Big 12 team or Pac-12 or ACC or whatever? This is absolutely pitiful. Colorado State, Hawaii, and UConn all at home. Clearly, Michigan starting 3-0 with 3 easy wins in the non-con. You get your non-con games out of the way over the first 3 weeks, and then you start your Big 10 slate, again, at home. So first 4 games of the year for Michigan at home, 3 non-con, and your first conference opponent, Maryland. I think Maryland is a pretty good team. They're not great. They're definitely not on the Michigan's level. I think they're a pretty good team. I like what they're doing offensively this year, and I like their coaching staff. And I've been kind of on record over the course of this offseason. I think Maryland is good enough to beat one of the big 3 or 4 teams in the Big Ten East, right? When you talk about Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State. I think most people would agree Maryland is maybe a rung below those 4 teams, but I do think Maryland is good enough in a given week to knock one or more of those 4 teams off. Now, the good news is if you're a Michigan fan, I don't think it will be you. I've already done a Michigan State version of these prediction videos, and I think Maryland beats Michigan State this year. I think you get the win at home, but this is a tricky game, especially when you're looking ahead the following week to that game at Iowa. Don't overlook the Maryland game. Again, offensively, they can be pretty good. They got Pineapple Jr. throwing the ball. They brought some wide receivers in through the transfer portal. There's some talent there offensively. And with the secondary, having to replace 3 starters in the secondary for Michigan, both your outside edge rushers from last year gone off to the NFL. I do think this is a tricky game for Michigan. And if I was picking like an upset game or a trap game for Michigan for 2022, this would probably be the game I would pick. However, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. You get the win against Maryland. You're 4-0. Then you got to go on the road and take on Iowa. Iowa last year was kind of a quirky team, right? I think they won 10 games, won their division. You blew them out in the Big Ten title game. If you go back and watch Iowa last year, or even read up just read up the write-ups after each game, Iowa survived on defense and turnovers. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but their offense was not even average. I mean, their offense was unwatchable the majority of the season. It was absolutely horrible. I think they led America in turnovers, though, 25 or something like that. They had 11 different players get interceptions. At Iowa can be a tough place to play, and Iowa loves to win these 17-10 type of games, right? 17-10, 20-13, 17-14, whatever, you get it. I don't think they have what it takes to compete with the talent of a Michigan. I know it's there. Other than that, I don't really see any cause for concern. Iowa's not a team that can air the ball out, that can spread the field. And if I'm a Michigan fan, that's what concerns me, particularly defensively, because, again, of the reasons I've already mentioned multiple times. A bunch of new starters in the secondary and no obvious answers at edge rusher to replace Hutchinson and Ajabo, right? You don't really have to worry about that with Iowa. I think Michigan goes into Kinnick Stadium, a tough place to play, and gets the win. Michigan's on a roll, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-0. Back-to-back road games as you have to travel the following week to Indiana, which was one of, if not the worst teams, not just in the Big Ten, but in all of the Power 5 last year. I think they went 3-9 and didn't win a single conference game. Absolutely horrible. Hard to imagine they'll be that bad again in 2022, but again, not a team that should be competing with Michigan. I think you get the win against the Hoosiers. You remain undefeated. And then you have what I think is probably your second toughest, maybe third toughest game of the year, Penn State. Penn State, I believe, has a bye week before this game, which is a huge benefit for Penn State. I think they beat you. I know it's at home, and look, I would not be surprised one bit if Michigan wins this game. To me, this is one of those toss-up, like 50-50 type of games that could go either way. People tend to look at Penn State's overall record at the end of the season last year and kind of dismiss them for 2022. You have to remember, Penn State was a top 10 team the first month and a half of the season. Then the quarterback went down, and everything was a disaster from that point forward. The quarterback is back. Now, they got to find some answers in some other places. They need a playmaker. They need some running backs. The defense is going to have to play a little bit better overall. But Penn State is one of those teams that, at least talent-wise, is close to being on par with a Michigan. I think clearly Ohio State, the most talented overall team in the Big Ten, doesn't mean they'll win it all. They were the most talented overall team last year as well. And, of course, Michigan beat them and made the playoffs after winning the Big Ten. But I think Penn State and Michigan, I think this will be a really, really good game. It would not surprise me for Michigan to win. It's a home game, which is a huge benefit. But I think Michigan trips up here and takes a loss to Penn State, their first loss of the season. You get a bye week to get over that before you host in-state rival Michigan State, who it seems like you hadn't beaten in a while. They beat you last year in kind of a weird game. You were clearly the better team than Michigan State last year, and honestly, you should have won that game. You kind of blew it and gave it away at the end with a weird turnover. Jim Harbaugh doing the QB hokey pokey, sending McCarthy in there when maybe he shouldn't have. It was just some odd coaching decisions in terms of game plan, philosophy, quarterback rotation, things like that in the second half of that game. I felt more, I hate saying this because it seems disrespectful to Michigan State, but if you watched that Michigan State game last year, this is one of those games where it really feels more like Michigan lost that game than it did like Michigan State won the game, right? I think you get your revenge in your first win against in-state rival Michigan State this year. You get the W against Sparty. On the road at Rutgers, Greg Schiano yet to live up to what he did his first go-round at Rutgers, right? He was there a decade or so ago, had them winning 10 games. A long way from that right now for Schiano at Rutgers, even though you have to go on the road and play there. Probably the worst home field advantage in the entire Big Ten, Rutgers. I think you get the win on the road at Rutgers. All right, and then you hit into the home stretch here, the last 3 games of the season, which I think are a tricky 3 games. Everyone knows the story about Nebraska. You get them at home, but so that's an obvious advantage. Nebraska, 3-9 last year, famously, really. I think Nebraska is probably the most talked about 3-9 team in college football history. You know, they lost 8 of the 9 games were by 1 score or less. The 9th loss, which was to Ohio State, was by, I think, 9 points. And I'm, everybody, I'm tired of it. I'm sure you're tired of it, hearing about, 3-9, but all the losses were close. I do think Nebraska is going to be a way better team in 2022, record-wise, than they were in 2021. I think it's possible Nebraska triples their win total and gets to 9 wins. I don't think that's likely, but I think that's possible. If they even win half those 1-score games that they lost last year, that puts them at 6 wins. And then if they get an upset or 2, they're at 7 or 8. Who knows? I think this is a tricky game. You get them at home. I think a lot of this, the outcome of this game, I think depends a lot on where Nebraska is at this point in the season, right? November 12th, towards the end of the year. If things have gone bad for Nebraska, it's possible Scott Frost is already fired at this point in the season, or at the very least knows he's on his way out the door. If Nebraska is somehow on a roll, if Nebraska is still in the hunt to win the Big Ten West, which is clearly the weaker division of the 2 right now, when you're talking Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State over there in the East, and in the West, Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, Purdue, whatever. So clearly the weaker of the 2. But if Nebraska's still in the hunt for the Big Ten West, whether they're at 2 or 3 or possibly even 4 losses, they could still be in the hunt for the Big Ten West. I think this becomes a tricky and a dangerous game for Michigan. With that being said, I do think Michigan pulls it off at home and gets a win over Nebraska. But, this game and the Maryland game, I think are very tricky and are probably the difference between Michigan having a chance to win the Big Ten when they play, or win the Big Ten East when they play Ohio State at the end of the year, or only having an opportunity to ruin Ohio State's playoff chances at the end of the year, right? I gave you the win at Maryland. I'm giving you the win with Nebraska too. But those are 2 tricky games. Then you play Illinois. Illinois is a team, not quite a Maryland, but I wouldn't be shocked to see Illinois beat one of these teams that they're not supposed to beat. I don't think it's going to be Michigan. I think you get to back-to-back home wins here against both Nebraska and Illinois. But I like what Brett Bielema is doing at Illinois. Needs some more players, needs some more talent, needs some more depth. Probably needs another couple of years at least to make them anything close to relevant. But, of course, they beat Nebraska last year. They're not a terrible team, but they shouldn't be competing with Michigan. You get the win. And that brings us to, of course, the game at the end of the year on the road this time at Ohio State. This is going to be the point of the video where Michigan fans get a little bit mad, but I just don't see any way possible or imaginable that Michigan wins this game. Even if Michigan ends up being as good or even better than last year, which I have serious questions about because of what's going on defensively, I think Ohio State is going to be so much better than last year that it wouldn't even matter. I know Ohio State defensively was bad last year, and really they're going to have most of the same personnel defensively. I think Ohio State's issues last year defensively were less talent and personnel related and more scheme, philosophy, and coaching related. And of course, they got rid of the defensive coordinator and brought in one of the best defensive coordinators in football, Knowles from Oklahoma State, who had Oklahoma State with the top 5 defense last year. And when you look at Ohio State offensively, all of the weaknesses that I've talked about, or questions or concerns or whatever you want to call them about Michigan's defense, Ohio State has exactly what it takes offensively to take advantage of all of those weaknesses, questions, or concerns, whatever you want to call them, right? A Heisman candidate quarterback, 5 NFL wide receivers on that roster, a Heisman candidate running back in Travion Henderson, one of the top 3 or 4 running backs in college football, probably. You're talking Bijan Robinson, Tank Bigsby at Auburn, Deuce Vaughn at Kansas State, whatever running backs you want to name. If you're going to name a top 5, Travion Henderson is in that list. CJ Stroud slinging the ball around. And again, defensively, I don't see any way possible Ohio State doesn't improve leaps and bounds over what we saw last year. And I just don't think Michigan defensively is going to be able to do enough to slow them down like they did last year. I think Ohio State gets to win at the end of the year this season at home. Michigan takes another loss. But that's only 2 losses. I've got Michigan at 10-2. So, look, I don't have a crystal ball. Clearly, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. Maybe you go 11-1. If you go 11, here's the question, and I'll put this to everyone watching, Michigan fans and everyone else as well. If Michigan goes 11-1 and their only loss is the last game of the year on the road at Ohio State, and let's say they lose by 10 or 13, somewhere in that range there, okay? Ohio State's 12-0, Michigan 11-1. Ohio State goes on to the Big Ten title game, blows out whatever half-dead carcass the Big Ten West sends to Indianapolis, which is what's going to happen. You've got Ohio State at 13-0, Big Ten champions, clearly there in the playoffs. And you got Michigan sitting over here at 11-1, and their only loss was, let's say, 2 touchdowns or less to that same Ohio State team. Any chance Michigan gets into the playoffs? I know it's impossible to say for sure because it would depend, of course, on what happens in all of the other conferences, right? Do you have an undefeated Pac-12 champion or a 1-loss Pac-12 champion? Or do you have a 2 or a 3-loss Pac-12 champion? What about the Big 12? What happens there? Do we get an Oklahoma State Baylor type scenario where both teams have a couple of losses and maybe have played themselves out of the playoffs? What about the ACC? If Clemson stumbles again, does the winner of the ACC get into the playoffs? Probably not with 2 losses, right? And then, of course, you got the SEC. I think there's only 3 teams that have any chance at all of making the playoffs in the SEC. That, of course, would be Alabama, Georgia, and the third one, I think, is Texas A&M. I don't think Texas A&M is going to make the playoffs, but it's just in terms of talent and overall roster and coaching staffs and things like that, the only other team I see with a possibility would be Texas A&M. And we've seen 2 SEC teams get in multiple times, including last season. Georgia and Alabama happened again in 2017. Georgia and Alabama. So we've seen it multiple times. So we know it could happen in the Big Ten, right? Because we've seen it happen in the SEC. Will it happen? Difficult question to answer because it depends on so many other things. And I didn't even mention Notre Dame, who is kind of the monkey in the middle when you talk about weird playoff scenarios, right? Because if Notre Dame's 12-0, they're getting in. Now, I don't think Notre Dame's going 12-0. They host Clemson. They host Southern Cal. They have to play at North Carolina. They have to play a neutral site game in Las Vegas against BYU. Those are 4 tricky games for Notre Dame. Brand new coaching staff there too. So I don't think Notre Dame's going 12-0. I think they're probably losing at least 2 of those games. So I don't think Notre Dame will be a factor. I think it's possible if I'm 1 game off about Michigan and they're 11-1 instead of 10-2, I think it's possible they get in. They made the playoffs last year, which will help their argument for 2022 if they're 11-1, right? Particularly if it's a close loss at the end of the season on the road at Ohio State and Ohio State ends up 13-0 with a Big Ten title, right? Anyway, let me know what you think about that possibility or scenario down below. And let me know where you agree or disagree with me on my predictions for Michigan in 2022. I appreciate everybody watching. Have a good morning.